Coming up on Transformers University, with Five Faces of Darkness behind us and Season 3 well underway, we take a look at 5 more episodes of the 3rd season of the original Transformers cartoon right now on Transformers University. Hello, my friend, and welcome to episode 63 of Transformers University. I am your host, Anthony Brutali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.INFO, the Toy Archive, the website, this podcast, and more. And today, we are getting back to the original cartoon, the thing that propelled Transformers into the cultural consciousness. And we are continuing with Season 3, and this time we're going to go episodes 6 through 10. And these episodes are certainly unique in how they set up Season 3 and how they end up telling very unique sci-fi stories using the Transformers. And those stories are certainly different among Transformers lore. And I think it's important to mention here something that we brought up a bit earlier was the time slot change for Transformers in various markets, including the one I grew up in New York. So a lot of these episodes aired really early in the morning, and I did not see many of these as a kid, and so we will have a bit of a unique perspective on these, because a lot of these, the ones that we're going to cover in this episode, are ones I saw as an adult, and that's particularly true of the first one we're going to talk about, Season 3, Episode number 6, overall Episode number 71, The Killing Jar. And I first saw this episode as part of Kid Rhino's home video releases of the original series back in the year 2000. So I was about 22 years old, give or take, 21 or 22, when I first saw this one. And this one is one of my personal favorites in Season 3. And it is written by Michael Charles Hill. You may remember him from The Gambler and Starscream's Brigade, along with Joey Kuihara Piedra. And he has no other credits other than the handful of Season 3 episodes he co-wrote with Michael Charles Hill. Now, this episode starts with Ultra Magnus, and he is stargazing, and he doesn't see a Quintesson ship coming. The ship disguises itself as Skylynx and captures Ultra Magnus. The Quintesson scientist and his compatriot test Ultra Magnus by making him fight Rodimus, and I say Rodimus in quotes because it is a hologram of Rodimus. The Quintessons then go to Cha'ar and disguise their ship as Broadside? Well, it's another large ship that's working for the Decepticons that looks like Broadside's vehicle mode. I do wonder if the plan for Broadside at some point was to make him a Decepticon, or have a Decepticon version of him, as he does appear a lot in these early episodes in his jet mode. Or at least his jet mode model does, I should say. So the Quintessons go to capture Cyclonus, and much like with Ultra Magnus, they make him fight an illusion of Galvatron. And the Quintessons are comparing these two very loyal and skilled soldiers. They then head to Junkion and use a TV clown to kidnap Wreck-Gar. And once they do, they use this clown to lure him into the ship. And once they do capture him, they leave him in an empty room.
Take a Junkion out of the most cluttered environment in the galaxy, then place him in a completely bare cell. He should be shocked into total inactivity by the change.
And no, he does not leave that room. The way he found it, he wrecks it and makes it very much comfortable to him. And I find that interesting, because that's what a lot of us do. I think when we're left to our own devices, we kind of turn a place into our own little comfort zone. Then back at an EDC base, we see Marissa Fairborn, and she is captured by her, quote, dad. Now, once again, it's a hologram, but her dad is voiced by Bill Ratner. And if you remember our Meet the Cast episode a few weeks back, Bill Ratner was also the voice of Flint on G.I. Joe, and Flint's real name on G.I. Joe was Deshiel Fairborn. So Marissa Fairborn shares the same last name, and it wasn't until many, many years later that this was confirmed to be Flint's daughter. But it's a nice little Easter egg late in the show, that if you know your parts and you know your pieces, you can kind of string it together. Now, the Quintesson scientist goes to meet his 4 captives. He observes them in their jail cells. They realize they are in their jail cells. And the Quintessons take Marissa for examination. At this point, Wreck-Gar fires his fist into a panel on the wall that deactivates the device, keeping Marissa knocked out. And, of course, wackiness ensues. The prisoners attempt a jailbreak, and the Quintesson scientist orders his bodyguard to do this.
God! Transform into alternate mode and destroy the human!
I think that's the first, or if not the only time. I'd have to look that up. But that is one of the few times you will ever hear the term alternate mode used within the context of the Transformers cartoon. So neat little tidbit there. Just then, the ship flies into an electron storm, and everything and everyone starts to malfunction. Ultra Magnus then short-circuits the prison bars, which are electrical bars, as they steer through the storm. The prisoners decide to attack and free themselves from their captors, but Ultra Magnus and Cyclonus square off, each of them vying for the ship. Wreck-Gar fights the Quintesson guard, and Marissa Fairborn fights the scientist. Fairborn then realizes the ship is being pulled into a black hole, and there is only one functional escape pod. The Quintesson scientist is about to use it and sets the launch sequence. Everyone fights over the escape pod a la Spaceballs, and the pod ends up launching empty. But during the launch and the open of the airlock, Ultra Magnus is sucked out into space. Why is Ultra Magnus floating in space like this? Well, he's not there for long, as he's pulled in by Cyclonus with his tractor beam.
Cyclonus, you saved me? But why? Warriors such as you and I should meet their end in battle.
So, as the two warriors square off one more time, the ship is pulled into the black hole. And colors for everything on the other side of the black hole are a bit different. Cyclonus is orange and green, Ultra Magnus is olive green and maroon, Marissa has blue skin and purple hair, Wreck-Gar is teal and pink in a very G2 color scheme, the Quintesson scientist is purple and yellow, and the Quintesson guard is red and purple. As they observe, it's called a negative universe where the ship has entered, and the ship now needs to re-enter the, quote, white hole in order to get back to their regular universe. The group decides to work together and repair the ship. The Transformers involved each donate parts, and they have to enter that white hole at the same trajectory. And Marissa and Wreck-Gar, they're ready to go back.
Besides, if we did it once, we can
go back, Jack, and do it again.
So the ship successfully enters the white hole. The Autobots and Decepticons are on the other side, each waiting for their respective soldiers and fighting. At a standoff on the ship, they agree to split peacefully. But Ultra Magnus and Cyclonus know it's only temporary.
Don't try to stop us. There would be no point in that. It appears to be a standoff out there and in here. Then we will go our separate ways, but the next time we meet, it will be as enemies. Yes, as soldiers on opposing sides. No more, no less.
And thus, the experiment revealed something in particular to Ultra Magnus.
We traveled from one universe to another and back again. But as citizens of the same galaxy, we're still so far apart.
And, you know, as far as this episode goes, this one is pretty unique and pretty interesting. First off, let's talk a bit about the cast. It's a nice, small, tight group of characters on here. There are not a lot of anything. There's an Autobot, a Decepticon, a Junkion, 2 Quintessons, and a human. And that's the whole episode, aside from a few holograms here and there. But, you know, there's no Galvatron other than the hologram. There's no Rodimus other than the hologram. Early on in season 3, after the big epic that was Five Faces of Darkness, we're now at a place where we can use just a few characters to tell a much more compelling story. I'm pointing that out now because this is kind of something that happens throughout the episodes we're covering today on Transformers University. The other thing I've noticed, and again, this is something we'll probably talk about a bunch as we cover the next 4 episodes, there's a lot of missed toy opportunities here for Hasbro or Takara. As at the time of this recording in 2019, we've never gotten a series of recolors of any of these characters in their Killing Jar colors. I would love an Ultra Magnus in his olive green and maroon, or an orange and green Cyclonus, or the teal and pink Wreck-Gar. We've never really gotten Quintus on, so we can't really do that. And Marissa was only a club exclusive. But long story short, even with just those 3 characters, they would make for great, very specific show-oriented repaints that would be a lot of fun to see. And that takes us to another episode that I definitely did not see as a kid, and don't even really remember seeing as an adult, even though I've watched through my box sets at least 2 or 3 times. Just even looking at the title of this one, I couldn't even tell you what it was about until I watched it. And that is Season 3, Episode 7, overall episode number 72, Chaos, by Paul Davids, who you may remember from Cosmic Rust. In the episode, we open on a Skuxoid being chased by Blastoff. Blastoff takes down the Skuxoid and interrogates him, steals his weapon, and gets a map to a planet where this weapon's ammo is found. And this weapon is incredibly strong. It shoots shards of these crystal pellets and takes down this EDC shuttlecraft, and we'll find a bit more about where they are in a little bit. But back on Cybertron, Cup is sharing another one of his Cup Tales. This one, a story about the Ik-Yak, which we remember from Transformers the movie. And this story takes place on Planet Dread. He's with Blur and Wheelie and Grimlock, and we get a flashback into the Cup Tale. And we actually see an Ik-Yak and what it looks like as it sinks into the muck on Planet Dread. And we see a younger Cup. Grimlock wants to know more about the Planet Dread and about a monster named Chaos from said planet. And this strikes a nerve with Cup. Just then they get an incoming transmission from Wreck-Gar on the planet Goo, which we'll find out is where Blastoff had shot down the Skuxoid. The Autobots hop aboard Skylynx to investigate, and they find the downed EDC shuttlecraft along with a really torn up EDC station. Cup examines the wreckage and recognizes the ammo as death crystals. And Cup is spooked. Just then, Runamuck, the battle charger, the white one, if you're not sure which one is which, like I am, is riding Blastoff in his shuttle mode, and he fires on the Autobots with the death crystals. The Autobots load into Skylynx, and the chase is on. The Autobots escape, but Grimlock demands to know what death crystals are. And in this scene, the computer reacts to Grimlock's request, and it's oddly silent, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But Cup goes on to explain about the death crystals.
Death crystals are the hardest, most destructive things in the universe. They grow on that horrible monster Chaos.
Who Chaos?
He lives in Quig Mountain on the planet Dread, deep in the caves. No robot has ever seen him and survived.
Me, Grimlock, already not like Chaos.
On to another Cup tale, as Cup tells that after the Ik-Yak, the orbs captured him and enslaved him to mine death crystals. As he was in the mine, Chaos entered the mine, and Cup ran further into the mine, where he found other slaves locked up. He was about to free them, but dropped the keys and ran away. And Cup is very regretful. And let's take a quick step back here. So there were these slaves that were minors, and there's a group scene with them in this episode, and we kind of get a bit of what they call in voice acting walla, where a bunch of characters all speak at once. And in this walla, we hear the final line in Transformers ever used of Casey Kasem.
We've got to get back to our home planet!
Now, this goes back to earlier while we were talking about the computer being oddly silent. Now, it's fairly well known that Kasem left the show not happy with the writers and producers on the show for some insensitivities towards people from the Middle East in the naming of various nations and characters, which we will get to in a few episodes. And these places and characters are what basically caused Kasem, who is of Libyan descent, to quit the show. But Kasem was usually the voice of the computers, such as Teletran 1, which is probably why the computer line was missing earlier on. And this one line, since it was in Walla, was probably left in. But let's get back to the story. So back on planet Dread, the Decepticons are building a weapon. The slaves there, they try to escape the mine. And Galvatron sends Predaking to catch them, and he does. The Autobots arrive on Dread, and they are noticed and stalked by the Predacons. The Predacons attack. Blur is knocked into this same quicksand muck that got the Ik-Yak, but is rescued by Skylynx. The Autobots repel the Predacons, and the Predacons return to Galvatron. Skylynx follows, and the Autobots attack, and the Decepticons counter with Predaking. All of the Autobots except Skylynx retreat into the mine. Predaking seals the entrance by cutting off a big chunk of rock, after only Cup is able to get in. And now it's time for Cup to go hunting Chaos. Outside, the other bots find Skylynx and continue the fight. But in the mine, Cup lures Chaos to chase him. And Chaos has this to say. And I timed out that scream. It is almost 12 seconds. It is 11 and change long. So that is an 11 plus second scream. Cup makes good on what he didn't do the first time and frees the slaves. Cup and the slaves move the cannon that the Decepticons are building and knock over Galvatron and Astrotrain with the barrel. They point the cannon at the mountain, and Chaos steps out and gets hit with some death crystals. So, was Chaos destroyed? We don't necessarily know. The Autobots flee in Skylynx with the slaves, and they head back to Cybertron. But of course, there's time for one more Cup tale.
Did I ever tell you about the time I was flying in this busted shuttle named Jonagar?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Quiet! Me, Grimlock, want to hear story of Jonagar.
And that's right, that's Jonagar and the whale. And, you know, that that little bit of a Cup tale reminded me of an old comedy bit that I personally love. I'm a big fan of old Abbott and Costello radio comedy from the 30s and 40s. And so I am going to tack this on to the audio version only. So if you're on YouTube watching this, go and hunt down the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, even Spotify, and give the end of this episode a listen. I'm going to tack it on after the theme. It's a great little comedy bit that Abbott and Costello used to do about Jonah and the whale. Now, the other thing about Cup Tales, that little gag came to me today, right before I started recording, because the game Transformers Earth Wars, the mobile game, used the phrase Cup Tales in it, and I just cannot let that go. So I hope you enjoyed that more than you were annoyed by it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this episode is one I don't remember, but man, this one is pretty good, especially with the young Cup versus the old Cup. Another great toy tie-in that we've never seen We could totally do a Skylinks recolor as Jonagar. Pick what you want, just as the reference itself would be fun. And again, we have a small cast here. Yes, we have Galvatron and Astrotrain, who basically do nothing in the episode. The episode's about Cup and Chaos. But we got Cup, Blur, Wheelie, Skylinks, Grimlock. Nice, tight cast. We got the Predacons, Galvatron, Astrotrain as kind of interference and blast off and run amok. But Chaos is really the villain here. And there's another villain that fits into that Rose Gallery from the cartoon that we never really see or hear of again. And so while we always remember Starscream and Soundwave and Megatron and Shockwave, outside of the Decepticons, there is certainly a wealth of bad guys to draw from in future Transformers lore. And some do, but I always feel like maybe they don't do it enough. And speaking of Transformers lore, this is going to take us to one of the most important episodes of Season 3, one that will tie into the season finale. But for now, let's just take it on its own. This is Season 3, Episode number 8. Overall, Episode number 73, Dark Awakening. And this one was written by Antoni Zalewski. You may remember Tony Zalewski from Auto Berserk. And I mentioned before how these episodes didn't have much of an impact on me as a kid for the most part because I never got to see them, at least not in their first run. But one person who did get to see this episode and will be taking you through it is my good friend, Gabriel Owens, the Salty Seaman.
Hey folks, Salty Seaman here, reviewing Dark Awakening, a very powerful episode in the Transformer G1 franchise. Definitely one of the most remembered, but in a way, kind of overall a pointless episode. We get a lot of things that, eventually do not matter, and and there's just a vibe to this episode that is wholly different from most of the other episodes in this franchise. It's a very dark episode. It was designed to, kill questions, in my mind, designed to kill questions about, is Optimus Prime ever going to get fixed and come back? Because, it was understandable when you're that age. You see the movie, and yeah, Prime takes a beating, but at the same time, you've seen these guys get disassembled and worse and come back. So I'm guessing, maybe there was a lot of questions they're getting, like, oh, someone's going to come fix Optimus Prime. And they're like, no, we're going to, spoiler alert, eject him into a sun, so there's no possibility ever he comes back. And the way they do it is so, for this cartoon, very gratuitous. It's a very, very dark. The setting is dark. Everything in the episode is dark. And it definitely gave the hardcore fans a lot to talk to and be memorable. But overall, yeah, it doesn't end up having a whole lot of weight. It has been a while since I've seen this. The last time I went through my roundabouts, I think it was about 5 years ago with my kid, and we either skipped this episode or I just somehow missed it. So I know I haven't seen it recently. It's going on, I think last time may have been over 10 years ago since I've seen this. So here we go with a little bit of Dark Awakening. So we have the start of the plot. The Autobots are piloting a very archish looking ship, and they're being attacked by the Decepticons. They got ambushed due to the Quintessons giving the Decepticons information. Decepticons are in some very movie-ish. Galvatron's lead ship is straight out of the movie. We show Galvatron is still crazy, which is nice. He is, he blows up the screen after the Quintessons, basically did what they told him. Like, hey, here you go. Let's drive to the Autobots. As long as it suits your purposes, and he destroys the view screen because Galvatron is mad. We get space rocket launchers called torpedoes, which as a Navy guy, I really appreciate. We have space torpedoes here from Galvatron. Also to be noted, the ship isn't quite as on model as I remembered from the movie, but it looks like it's based on, the movie Galvatron ship design, which I think kind of was Cyclonus as well. I don't. At this point, Season 3, some of that stuff with Galvatron, you just kind of have to buy it and move on. So the Autobots escape certain doom and destruction by escaping in a very large life pod. wholly recycled plots, Batman. And they say they have no communication and they'll be lost. They could be lost in space for months. Here's a little bit of why a lot of people really love Rodimus Prime. Unfortunately, this is the escape pod and not a rod pod. But Spike wonders aloud what happens when the air runs out for him and Daniel.
Oh, swell. What do Daniel and I do when the air runs out?
Well, basically, you'll have two choices, suffocate or smother.
Which just is hilarious. Just so callous, so sarcastic. I love Rodimus. So the Autobot spot what looks like some kind of refuge, which looks like some kind of giant floating, possibly really thin aircraft carrier looking thing. We see Decepticons in pursuit. They're supposed to go check out the debris, but now they're there. Something happened. This episode has some issues. Among them, the people flying, we suddenly have Coneheads. Instead of Thrust, Dirge, and Ramjet, we have Dirge into Thrusts. So we get exposition on what this is. This is the tomb of the late Autobots who died in the war. They say it's about the size of Manhattan. It's definitely an interesting piece of the cartoon lore, because we'd already seen in the movie what the Decepticons had their crypt, which we will see again later in Starscream's Ghost, and I think one other place. And this is basically the one and only episode we see the mausoleum in space, and it causes a few issues, which we'll get to here in a second. But we also learn why we never see it again, coming up real soon as well. We get inside the crypt, and we have Cup points out this thing. It's like the Veil of Remembrance, remembering the Autobot heroes of the past. And I think there is an animation error here. I think they were supposed to show at least stock footage in this veil, probably of season 1 and season 2 stuff. And instead, we just get this weird fog. And I think there was a miscommunication, or something happened there. But I think that was supposed to. It's probably Optimus Prime, maybe even our first glimpse of Optimus Prime, but instead we get nothing. But it does kind of add to this weird, eerie ambiance. This whole episode has just muted colors, reds and a lot of black, and it looks like there's a filter over it, just a little darker than other episodes. They're definitely going. This is like I believe aired around Halloween. Like this was like a Halloween episode. So we get some interesting confirmed dead here. Ironhide, Ratchet, Prowl, Huffer. The first 3 we saw die in the movie. So they are, this is definitely confirming them dead. And we had Huffer, who I believe in like the original script and or storyboards also dies. But of course that is not canon. So him dying here is, him confirmed dead here is he died off screen somewhere. Notably not among them are your other favorite Autobots that you can always say survived, if you choose to believe that, such as Brawn, who is a famous one in the fandom for a long time. People not believing one shot to the shoulder would take him out of commission. So if you're a big Wilczek fan, maybe you could just imagine he was merely badly damaged in the scene we see him in. And then we get a gruesome sight as Daniel accidentally turns something off, some kind of power generator, and we see a very beat up Optimus Prime, doesn't look like anything has been done to prep his body for it. He looks worse than he did in the movie dying. He is very like robot zombie looking. And then Daniel has opens up another crypt, and a very generic Autobot falls out. I think there's been a lot of debate on who he was. Some people saying Hauler possibly. He kind of looks like a knockoff Reflector Bot almost. But then a lot of the generic robot designs all kind of had that basic look, so, I don't know. You can read into that what you will. So the Autobots think maybe there's something to Daniel's story after they run into him and calm him down, and they go check out Optimus Prime's tomb. I should bonus, by the way, it's Rodimus, Cup, Ultra Magnus, and RC with Daniel and Spike. We get to Optimus's tomb, and a couple of the shots, the impression on the outside of his tomb, there's a sculpted impression of Optimus Prime, and he has a mouth in a few scenes, and he's very weirdly off model elsewhere, but definitely there's flashbacks to the Ladybird books, which famously has a very well painted picture of Optimus with a mouth guard. And again, plenty. You could throw plenty of fanical reasons why that is, other than an edit, an obvious just animation error, modeling error of some sort. The Decepticons finally show up. They find the tomb empty. After they find the tomb empty, we have a battle outside the veil. Again, they go through that weird non-moving veil. Some interesting things with the battle. We see, what becomes like, they have one stock animation of Galvatron transforming. That and they did that for a lot of characters. Megatron, especially Optimus Prime. And his always seems weird because it always feels like it's the size is never consistent. They kind of zoom it in or pull it in close, and it's always like this. It's still the same It's still the same animation sequence. In this case, like he fills the whole screen, and it just looks very awkward. And we also have the sweeps get blasted out of the air, which is like a recurring motif in season 3. Is it's pretty obvious these sweeps are just getting absolutely vaporized often, and they're just treated kind of as disposable. We never. There's been a lot of theory about one the Insecticons became Scourge. One of the Insecticons is Scourge. I can't remember which one, but because of their cloning technology, that he can just make innumerable sweeps, which is why their numbers are very inconsistent, and we see them die quite often. Also, when Scourge and some sweeps and Cyclonus land, their guns appear in their hand, like out of one of the few scenes that there's been other scenes where this has happened, which has given rise to the fan theory of subspace, where they keep extra weight or weapons or mass, etc., etc. Up to you how much you believe that, but this is definitely a strong indication of it. Decepticons push them back through the veil. Looks like they have the upper hand. Galvatron promises to rest them here in the tomb with the rest of them, and hit your mentor, i.e. Optimus Prime, when Sue should attack, but Optimus Prime himself, his corpse has obviously reanimated, looking a little less beat up as he was when Daniel first sees him in the spooky tomb part, but no less looking, not looking 100%, but he freaks the Decepticons out. He still he's laying down heavy firepower. The sweep are essentially spooked. They run, and they manage to get them off the mausoleum, and that's when we have a commercial break after Optimus Prime comes out of the mist and stands. And I definitely remember this as a kid as like, what? Oh my god! Like this was, you didn't know where they were going with this. I think at that moment I was like, there's no way he's back for good. I mean, I think the signs of his damage kind of gave it away that this was going to be some kind of swerve. Not the character, but some kind of plot twist, and I was very, very interested to see what happened next, and already it was very, very engaging for a 9 going on 10-year-old. So here we get one of our first major plot issues in that Optimus is like asks Rodimus the Matrix safe. He says yes. Rodimus is gleefully ready to hand this over. Interesting point of Rodimus's take on leadership is like, it's cool and all, but as soon as Prime shows up, he's like, hey man, right here you go. Prime is obviously in bad shape. Ultra Magnus kind of says, hey, wait, maybe we shouldn't do this right away, and then Rodimus is like, well, it's a Prime.
Come on, guys. He's just shook up a little. You'd be too if you'd been dead for years.
Which is a weird statement because at this point, it may have been a year going by the general chronology of Season 3. We pretty much establish, it took them about a year after the events with Unicron to drive the Decepticons off, start rebuilding Cybertron, reestablish a connection with, the Galactic Federation, whatever they're called. So it's been taking place in 2006, and jumping this ahead years would imply a while. And Daniel. No, number one, Daniel still looks to be 6. He has not changed animation models. So turns out Optimus leads the group over, and we find out he's been building a repair ship. But he is a little off. He keeps talking about a must complete mission, But Hot Rod's so happy, or Rodimus is so happy to see him, he rushes over, immediately handing him the Matrix, which was obvious a weird trigger for Optimus. For we start to kind of get a grasp of what's going on. He struggles really, really hard to get the Matrix into him, which just seems very, very strange. And then he turns on the Autobots and the Witwickies and kind of blasts them away, nearly killing everyone, and he escapes in the shuttle. So now we know something is amiss with Optimus Prime. There is something other than his own person self-controlling him. We see Daniel and Spike definitely paralyzed under a ton of broken stuff, but of course they're the magical Witwicky family, and they just pull themselves right out. Prime gets back to Cybertron and rallies the troops. It becomes apparent this is some kind of plot. He's siccing a attack on the Quintessons, blaming them for the deaths of Rodimus, or as I think he calls him, Hot Rod, RC, Ultra Magnus, Cup, and the Witwickies, which sends everyone into a furious rage, wanting revenge. Grimlock grieving for, Grimlock's grief causes him to cause damage. Springer, very emotionally hurt by the death of RC, as of course you assume the others. And the Autobots are ready to full-scale wipe out the Quintessons. So apparently this was done by the Quintessons and is all according to plan, and we get a little bit of Quintesson typical dry wit humor.
The entire Autobot fleet moves to attack us.
Precisely as we predicted. May I propose an anticipatory snicker of triumph?
So the Autobots and the Witwickies escape in a fashioned out of... you gotta wonder what these spaceships are made out of, considering you have a lot of dead Autobots in there with probably perfectly functioning parts. Were not they cannibalizing, the various Autobots around in the Mausoleum, both Prime and the second group. They don't really touch on where they get the parts, just, they cobbled it together from the debris. Okay. And then, of course, they launch it in the sun, and they make sure to let us know we're never seeing these dead people again. Stop asking us. So, man, it's a rough scene. Like, this whole episode, it's so dark. It's so dreary. It is, in terms of, being a Halloween episode, if that is indeed what it was meant to do, and a bit of a standalone, I think it does a really, really good job at this point. Like, I know as a kid watching this, I was completely enraptured with this episode. So the Autobots, our wayward Autobots with Hot Rod and company, crash land onto Cybertron. We find the only people holding down the fort are a rarely seen Snarl and Sludge, who ask them if they're ghosts, if they're dead, and then Snarl has a moment of wonderful existential crisis.
Sludge! Snarl! Are we glad to see you?
Me, Sludge, not glad to see you.
You are dead.
Maybe we did.
Anyways, that's just a great little line. So the Autobot fleet continues towards the Quintessons' all-out attack. All concerns are kind of swept aside because he's Optimus Prime. Who are we going to question the greatest Autobot leader? Perceptor says, maybe we should scout. He says no, and he kind of snaps at him for questioning his leadership. They get the message back, from Cybertron, hey, Hot Rod and the company are okay. He says it's a Quintesson trick. And also, why didn't the message from Cybertron come back don't trust Optimus Prime? Who knows? We see among the fleet attacking, we get a rare appearance by Skyfire. Power Glide is around, and also many aerial bots. Way too many for their, canonically 5, and there's 15, 20. And as they're led into this trap where the Quintessons have, a bunch of asteroids, battle stations hidden as space debris, start firing on them. We see a lot of Autobot deaths, many aerial bots, Skyfire, Power Glide. I think Power Glide a couple times. And everything is going according to plan, and the Quintessons kind of admit to, they are controlling Optimus Prime to the point where he feels like he is actually alive, but basically they've reanimated his corpse as a zombie. So they get contact with Rodimus's ship, or Hot Rod's ship, but at the same time, they still, Prime still says no. One minute he's a little bit, like, oh, they're still alive, like the real Optimus is happy, but then his Quintesson programming takes over, and he says, fire on them, and no one questions, maybe Prime, they're still under the assumption that Prime knows what he's doing, and no one's really questioning, this seemingly out of character, rash leadership he's being. So they just fire on, Hot Rod and company, which is horror, but while their troops, the aerial bots and very generic planes are getting blown up outside. There's a hole. The hole is breached and everyone floats out. Luckily, the Woodwickies got into spacesuits, or their little automated little transformer spacesuits, whatever I can't remember what the hell they're called. And then Perceptor and Air Raid are about to fire on them. Perceptor takes a closer look and realizes they are. He confirms they're alive, and the Quintessons say it's merely a minor setback. So the Autobots, Hot Rod and company, come on board, and we assume get the rest of the crew up to speed. What's going on with Optimus? He says he's going Optimus hunting. We get a brief shot, one of the rare shots in Season 3 of Hot Rod's, Hot Rod car mode, as opposed to the Rodimus Winnebago look. So that's pretty interesting, and, he's leading the Autobots, showing, he really is a strong leader. He busts through the command door and comes to face Optimus face to face. So we get a rather gruesome battle between Optimus and Hot Rod, who he calls Rodimus various points here. And also in Rodimus/Hot Rod jump models here. Rodimus's more mature-looking face shows up in a couple of these scenes, and sometimes they go back to the original Hot Rod. Prime himself, he's got for most of these scenes, he has the white backpack look, which he would switch on and off from season 1 and 2 with, and in some scenes he just has a plain red back, or some odd ones where he has like this weird like gray middle section, which I don't think is very common. But he goes through a lot of his different model sheets as they're going through his, and also his damage level ebbs and flows depending on which shot he's in. So, Rodimus gets tore up. Optimus loses an arm. It's a brutal fight. Optimus is really fighting, or as the Quintessons say, the remnants of his personality and memory. He's not actually what would later be called the spark of Prime isn't there. It's just, it's basically they've reactivated a ghost. Optimus finally overcomes it for a little bit, realizes what a monster they've turned him into. And, or the remnants of him. He gives the Matrix back to Rodimus and takes off. We don't get a scene of Rodimus really morphing, or Hot Rod morphing back to Rodimus. It looks like it was supposed to, but it just looks like he's kind of shaking, just in pain a lot. So, but, and then they're still being inconsistent with which face he has, as in a couple shots he's Hot Rod, in other shots he's got back his Rodimus face. So we finally wrap up this just brutal episode with Optimus, or the remnants of Optimus, fully back in control, turned over the Matrix, and he takes the flagship on a zombie suicide run into a detonator. He orders the Autobot fleet to flee, and the remnants of it flee. The Quintessons order all firepower onto the flagship, and they cannot believe that someone is still piloting and controlling this. I don't know why, maybe it could be autopilot, but, but the implication is, because Optimus Prime is essentially a zombie. He's, we see him just, his body just more brutalized as the attack goes on. And it's like twice he drops Tallulah 1, and he hits the detonator, presumably killing. We would see Quintessons again, which actually becomes a plot point much later on. Tying to this, but the presumption was the Quintessons were destroyed by this, but they do come back various times in the season, and it was definitely, there was an episode like everyone remembers if you watched that when you were of a proper age, like that stood out. It was so dark and dreary and brutal, and just people dying left and right. Optimus Prime's back, and he's just kind of creepy the entire time. And the fight with him and Rodimus is brutal, and him getting destroyed, as he's approaching the detonator is brutal. It's just, it really does stand as a fun one-off kind of Halloween special almost, which they didn't really do that kind of thing. But at any regards, I'm way over time here, and back over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Gabe. And if you want to catch Gabe's channel on YouTube, it is youtube.com/recharge138. And you can hear Gabe talk about all sorts of things, particularly movies about the military. Those are some of my favorite episodes that he does. And you can actually find me on a couple episodes there, usually talking heavy metal. We did this great episode on Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. So if you like those albums, go and check that out on his YouTube channel. Now, Gabe had mentioned or had speculated that this episode had originally aired around Halloween. He's kind of close, but he's kind of off. The original air date for this episode was October 1st in 1986. And if this episode reminded you of other cartoons, that's because Tony Zalewski pulled a David Wise with this script and reused chunks of it from an episode of Superpowers Team Galactic Guardians, which was the final season of, more or less, Super Friends. And so, though we don't have David Wise on this episode, today we are going to get Wise to the game with Tony Zalewski. So the episode in question from Superpowers Team was episode number 2, and it's the first story in that episode, Ghost Ship. And there's two big elements in that story that are very similar to Dark Awakening. One is that there is a space shuttle trying to escape at the start of the episode. And the other thing that's in common in this episode is once they do escape, they find a vessel floating in space like this. And whereas in Dark Awakening, it was the Autobot Mausoleum, in Ghost Ship, it was a ghost ship. And so let's first compare the escape sequence, because both ships seem to have the same problem. First, here's Dark Awakening.
We can't outrun them, not with an engine down.
And now, here is the Superpowers Team episode.
Can't we go any faster? With one engine out, give me a break.
All right. Now, the other thing was the size of said derelict in space. Here is the one of Spike from Dark Awakening.
It's the size of Manhattan.
And here is the Superpowers Team.
I don't believe it. It's the size of Manhattan.
Now, one of the characters in that scene of Superpowers Team was the DC character Firestorm. And that's important because as we transition to Season 3, Episode 9 overall, Episode number 74, Forever is a Long Time Coming. We'll find out that it was written by Jerry Conway and Carla Conway. Now, Jerry Conway is kind of comics royalty in a way that I did not know until I was researching this episode. Now, let's talk about his wife first, because there's not a lot on her. So Carla Conway was his first wife. Jerry's been married 3 times, and she is a writer herself, mainly a freelance writer and editor around New York City and Connecticut. Now, Jerry Conway has had a lifetime in comics and screen writing, and his comic work is incredibly important. I mean, shockingly so. So he was the writer to succeed Stan Lee on writing Amazing Spider-Man. He is the writer responsible for the Gwen Stacy storyline of much fame from the early Spider-Man days. And in his time at DC or Marvel, he co-created or created some of the most important characters in comics history, including the aforementioned Firestorm, the Punisher, Jason Todd, who would become Robin, Man-Thing, both regular size and giant size, Killer Croc, and a character known as Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers, who would eventually become the Captain Marvel that we see in films today. And this character was created in the late 70s as a feminist hero by the folks at Marvel and Jerry Conway. And so just in light of a recent conversation around a certain movement in the comics industry, I just wanted to point that out, that these statements on society and giving a voice to those who don't normally get a voice has been going on in comics for decades, and as it should be. Let's get into the story here. This is a fun one. So this one features the Autobots flying through space towards an asteroid belt where there is some strange energy. The Autobots in question: Blaster, Blur, Wreck-Gar, Perceptor, and a pair of Blaster's tapes. Now, the reason I'm pointing out Blaster's tapes is we hear them speak for the first time, and this is something I kind of forgot about to do in the Meet the Cast episode for Season 3. And that's mainly because the cassettes appeared in the movie, and so they did not speak in the movie, so I didn't think to cover them in Season 3. So, Rewind, voiced by Townsend Coleman. You may know him better as the original Michelangelo on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or as the original Tick.
1,200,043 and 7 months to be precise.
That was Rewind with the stats on where it's at.
And for the first time, we also hear Ram Horn in this episode.
So why'd you want us along? This ain't our kind of gig.
And Ram Horn was voiced by John Hostetter. And Hostetter was a character actor, a regular on Murphy Brown, a reoccurring character on Who's the Boss. Most notably was Bazooka on G.I. Joe, and appeared in Star Trek Insurrection as a Bolian officer.
Captain, Hars Adislo, we met at the Nelvato conference last year. Did you ever have a chance to read my paper on thermionic transconductance? Would you excuse me?
And sadly, Hostetter passed away at the age of 69 in 2016. Now, let's go back to the story. This asteroid is defended by Sharkticons. So the Autobots end up fighting these Sharkticons in space. They find out that the Quintessons are on the asteroid, trying to open what they call a time window. Near the asteroid, a Quintesson ship fires on the bots, and Perceptor is hit. The rest of the Autobots fly through the time window, but there's an animation error here. You only hear them fly through the time window. You see the time window, but you don't actually see the Autobots go through it. Just then, backup arrives. Superion and Rodimus Prime are firing on the Quintessons. The Quintessons flee, and a strange Autobot materializes. And Slingshot, of all people, has an observation.
Where'd this dinkoid come from? A toy store?
The Autobots, through the time window, get attacked, but Rewind has an idea of what's going on.
Do you realize what that is, Blur?
No, but you're going to tell me, aren't you? I can always tell when you're going to tell me something.
It's a Guardian from the earliest days of Cybertron, even before the Great War against the Decepticons.
How could that be a Guardian? There aren't any Guardians anymore, are there? And this certainly can't be Cybertron, can it?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know!
We meet a female Autobot with a crossbow, and she wounds a Guardian robot, rescuing the Autobots. She invites them to flee with her and believes they are slaves as well.
You don't look like slaves.
Slaves? Who's a slave? We're not slaves. What makes you think we're slaves?
You wear the same brand we all do. The hated mark of our servitude to the Quints. For 1,000,000 years, it has been our symbol of shame. A3 says we must make it a symbol of freedom.
A3's your main man?
Our leader, yes. With his coder remote device, we could freeze the Guardians in their tracks and drive the Quints from the city they forced us to build. Then slaves all over Cybertron would rise up to claim their freedom. But if we fail...
Blaster, we're in the past, when the Quintessons still ruled Cybertron and the robots were their slaves.
We find out this female Autobot is named Beta and is voiced by Susan Blue. We also find out that an Autobot named A3 is missing, and it turns out that is the Autobot that appeared through the time window, voiced by Tony Pope. The Quintessons observe what's going on out of this time window, and this time window is leaking chronal energy, which could mess with the time stream.
If the window isn't closed in the next hour, those ripples will spread through the universe. From Cybertron to the humans' planet Earth and beyond into infinity to jeopardize the stability of reality itself.
Now, the Autobots don't want to close this window because their friends are trapped on the other side, but the Quintessons want to destroy the window. The Quintessons attack the asteroid one more time, and the bots plan to repel this attack, but A3 gets hit and is sent hurling into space. Why is A3 floating in space like this? Superion flies out to snatch A3 and faces down 3 Quintesson ships all by himself, and for a moment is hopeless.
I have failed to, Rodimus. It is finished.
No, Superion!
You must live, that I may be born.
Alpha Trion.
A3.
The chronal force wraps Superion. He appears in 2 places at once, fighting off the Quintessons, and the Quintessons retreat. In the past, the Autobots attack a Quintesson base guarded by what are called Dark Guardian robots. Back in the present, the Quintessons contact the Autobots for a truce because they must close the window. In the past, the battle continues, and Ramhorn knocks down a Dark Guardian robot with 1 hit, and he is almost the size of the thing in the animation. Fast forward to the present, and the Autobots are instructed to close the window by the Quintessons. They walk through the steps of closing the window, but Rodimus hesitates because he wants to send someone through. A3 volunteers to go back and arrives at the Autobots and the Rebels in the middle of their battle. Now, early in the episode, they had mentioned a thing called the Coder remote that could be used to stop the Dark Guardian robots, and only A3 had it. It turns out A3's Autobot badge is the Coder remote, and he uses it to beat a slew of Dark Guardian robots. Now, remember, the Guardian robots are essentially Omega Supreme, or a version thereof, in terms of size and shape. Just then, A3 orders the other Autobots to go back to their time through the window. In the present, those Autobots arrive, and the window is destroyed. And rewind. It's a little slow to the party of what we've all already figured out.
Blur, it just hit me. A3, A for Alpha, 3 for Trion. You don't think...
What? That was the guy who created Optimus Prime? He was the father of the Autobots? You gotta be kidding.
And thus, just like we ended Dark Awakening with a celestial sign of Optimus Prime, we end this one with a celestial outline of A3, Alpha Trion himself. Now, this episode, once again, as I mentioned, all the episodes in this week's Transformers University podcast are interesting and unique in their own ways. This one is another time travel episode involving Alpha Trion and the Aerial Bots. And just to give you a quick summary of what we have here. So the Aerial Bots just saved A3. A3 will go on to build Optimus Prime out of Orion Pax when they met in War Dawn, when the Aerial Bots traveled to the past. Optimus Prime would build the Aerial Bots with Alpha Trion in the key to Vector Sigma when they headed to Cybertron. So there is a very bizarre circle of Alpha Trion, Optimus Prime, and the Aerial Bots built here. Another unique thing about this episode, no Decepticons at all. It's one of the few in the series, but again, a lot of great little toy opportunities here for the Transformers Generations line if they so wanted to do it. On a smaller scale, A3 would be a great little figure, a young Alpha Trion, maybe to go with the young Cup that we saw in Chaos. Beta, another female Autobot that would be great to get a figure of. And the Dark Guardians are an easy repaint of the Titan Omega Supreme figure. And that takes us to the final episode we will talk about today, Season 3, Episode 10, overall episode number 75, Starscream's Ghost by McGee McLaughlin. McLaughlin was a writer and production assistant on a number of 1980s cartoons. Wrote for the Deke version of G.I. Joe, wrote for Captain Planet and Kim Possible, and currently she hosts Kuan Yin meditation workshops around the Los Angeles area. This one we start on the planet of Junkion, where Junkyard, who is Junkion himself, is loading a ship of scrap metal for Octane, who has been exiled by the Decepticons, and we'll find out why in another episode. But interesting here that it may not have been intended to be Octane this entire time, but we'll get to that. There's a Skuxoid who plants a bomb on Octane's ship, and Octane takes off and decides to watch some adult entertainment while he's flying. It's a very bizarre scene. I think I used it in the Meet the Voice cast episode. So if you want to see what it looks like, check that out on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TFU.INFO. The episode was Meet the Cast of Season 3. So the bomb explodes, the ship explodes. Why is Octane floating in space like this? To be rescued by a passing ship and taken to Autobot City. Octane then goes and hangs out with his buddy Sandstorm, and he thinks he's being watched. Sandstorm just tells him he's paranoid, but it turns out the Combaticons have been spying on the two Triple Changers all along. And soon, as Octane and Sandstorm race around Earth, the Combaticons decide to fire on them. But they escape, and eventually the Triple Changers will head to space for a snack.
How's the food here?
Yeah, looks like the usual slop, high and static. Stuff always gives me surges.
For 20% off, what are a few surges?
Righto, let's go.
So while at the space Taco Bell, the Skuxoid continues his attempt to assassinate Octane. This time he tries shooting at him and misses, but chaos kind of ensues in the restaurant, and the gun is eaten. But the two Triple Changers do not notice. It's kind of a comedic scene here, where there's a lot of calamity going on, but the two people who are in the most danger don't see anything going on. We find out exactly what happened with Octane. That's something from a future episode that we will cover here in a future episode.
I interfered with Galvatron's orders. I swiped Trypticon and tried to become powerful enough to become the new leader of the Decepticons.
He said I'd never be welcome back in the ranks of the Decepticons. Galvatron vowed to get even.
And that episode in question is Thief in the Night, which we will cover at a later date. But the interesting thing here is exactly what Octane had said was exactly what Galvatron had said to Blitzwing at the end of Five Faces of Darkness. So Hasbro may have wanted one Triple Changer swapped out for another, especially since Octane was the newer toy at the time, and then the script was adapted for Octane. Now, the Skuxoid has a grenade and attempts to blow up the Triple Changers, and it fails and it goes unnoticed. He then just hops on Octane's back and starts punching him. Octane is not fazed by the punches at all and grabs the Skuxoid and begins to question him, and finds out that it is Galvatron who has hired the Skuxoid to kill Octane. So the Triple Changers head to Cybertron, and they are followed in by Cyclonus, Scourge, and the Sweeps. They attack Octane, and the chase is on once again. And Octane is chased into the depths of Cybertron. He ends up in a Decepticon burial chamber and decides to strike up a conversation with a few dead friends.
Sorry, Thundercracker. I'll hide behind someone else's marker. I know death comes to anyone who hides behind my marker.
That whole death comes to he who hides behind my marker is a hint at Dirge's tech spec quote, and it's something that was in the script for him in the movie but was never spoken. However, Dirge did not die in the movie and is seen several times throughout Season 3. So it's worth speculating as to who that marker actually belonged to. And the animation doesn't look like anyone we know. So maybe Dirge stole that quote from someone else. Octane, however, gets spooked and half transforms into truck mode. And while he's half transformed with his head out and his wheels out and his wings out all at the same time, he meets the ghost of Starscream. Outside the crypt, Cyclonus, Scourge, and the Sweeps decide to enter, and Cyclonus finds Octane in the melee and during this, gets possessed by Starscream. Now, with Starscream using Cyclonus to lead this group of Decepticons, they take Octane out in chains. As they're flying through the air, the Autobots spot them, and Sandstorm tries to help his friend, but is shot down by Cyclonus Scream. The aerial bots attack, as do other Autobots, and the Decepticons are forced to land. Cyclonus and Octane get caught by Rodimus Prime, and Starscream reveals himself via Cyclonus' body to Rodimus Prime.
Now let Octane go.
Octane is free to go.
Starscream.
That's right. And if you want a bonus beyond your wildest dreams, you will release us now.
And Rodimus lets him go. The Decepticons return to Galvatron, and air quotes Cyclonus interrogates Octane, and Octane agrees to talk. We cut to Rodimus Prime alone somewhere, and Galvatron and company arrive.
I have lived all my life for this day.
Ready when you are, Galvatron.
We must fight honorably, hand unit to hand unit.
As you wish.
And this notion of hand-to-hand combat, very reminiscent of an earlier episode from Season 1, Heavy Metal War. Rodimus and Galvatron fight, and Rodimus Prime gets Galvatron down. As Galvatron looks up, he realizes he is surrounded by Autobots with their weapons drawn. The Decepticons flee, and Galvatron returns to Cha'ar to find Cyclonus sitting on his throne. Cyclonus then reveals his true self.
Well, now, who do you think I mean?
Starscream!
Galvatron then shoots at Starscream, and Starscream's ghost flees the body. Cyclonus gets shot and comes to. Back to his normal self for a moment, Galvatron orders the sweeps to repair him. And then Scourge is shown to be possessed by the ghost of Starscream. And that's where we end on that cliffhanger. Now, really important is this particular episode, just like Dark Awakening is very important in Transformers lore. This one will echo throughout the history of the Transformers brand, almost all the way up to present day, and I'm sure for future stories as well. The concept of Starscream's ghost and Starscream being able to possess people and why he even has a ghost is actually a big part of the Beast Wars series of the late 90s. And in the toy line, this is one, as opposed to the other 4 episodes we talked about, that Hasbro and Takara have not missed out on chances to use a Starscream toy as a Ghost Starscream. And Ghost Starscream toys started coming out in 2001 and can be found all the way up, I believe, until like 2017. So, and that's only as of this recording. So the notion of Starscream's ghost is one that is incredibly important in a post-Transformers movie world. Now, just thinking about these 5 episodes overall, we have 2 very important ones, and actually maybe even 3 if you want to count the time travel aspect of Forever is a Long Time Coming. These are all kind of harder sci-fi episodes. They have more in common with Star Trek or The Twilight Zone than they do the first 2 seasons of the Transformers, and I think that's very important. The show itself is taking on a more serious tone. And while that may have alienated younger viewers, it may have been meant to appeal to older viewers. But again, that switch in time slot in some places, especially in New York, which is the largest media market in the United States, had to have hurt the Transformers brand at the time. But in retrospect, in the long term, this is what the tone of Season 3 usually is. And this is why a lot of old school fans really do like Season 3 the best out of 3 seasons of the cartoon, 4 seasons of the cartoon. Now, as I mentioned earlier, remember to stay tuned to the end for a little special tidbit if you're listening to the audio version of this show. And don't forget, if you are listening to the audio version of the show, you can check out this show on YouTube at youtube.com/TFU.INFO. You can catch every episode of this podcast there, plus all of our videos, toy reviews, and news coverage from Toy Fair, New York Comic Con, etc. Now, if you'd like to help the show, we'll be real quick about it. subscribe to the YouTube channel, as I mentioned, youtube.com/TFU.INFO. You can also subscribe at our Patreon, patreon.com/TFU.INFO. It's patreon.com/TFU.INFO. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get early access to the show and so many more fun goodies along the way, especially some insight into some of the recurring gags, sound effects, and music clips you hear in the show regularly. Of course, you can catch me on Twitter at TFU_info, on Facebook at facebook.com/TFU.INFO, on Instagram at instagram.com/TFU.INFO, and of course, on the web at www.tfu.info. Next time on the show, we are heading back to Japan. To take a look at the toy line and the media that was set up for the toy line. Let's just say the importing of Season 3 and how it was kind of different there. So if you liked this episode, you certainly should stick around for the next one, because we're going to break down the little differences in the series in Japan for Season 3, because some events that led into the season didn't actually happen in the land of the rising sun. Also, we're going to take a deep dive into the toy line for 86 in Japan, including a look at the company Kabaya and their candy toys, something that I have been hesitant to learn about in my Transformers fandom, and took a really deep dive in the research and came back pleasantly surprised at how much I didn't know and all the fun things I learned. So if you'd like to learn along with me, please come back for the next episode. But until then, I am your host, Anthony Bricali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.INFO. See ya.
Well, let's get started with the show. Let's do some funny stuff.
What funny stuff?
You know, let's tell something.
Well, we don't tell jokes. In fact, we have no jokes. We tell routine sort of stories. And
we have no joke.
No, that's right.
You're right.
I was telling them.
But I have a joke.
You have a what?
I have a joke.
Where'd you get it?
I tell a joke.
Where'd you get the joke?
I wrote it myself.
You wrote a joke?
Brand new one.
Wrote it yourself?
Nobody's ever heard it before.
Is it funny?
It's clean.
I don't mean that. Is it funny?
I think so.
And it's brand new?
Yes.
You think the folks out there will like it?
I think so. It's a fish story.
How long will it take to tell it?
A couple of seconds. The only thing is, you ain't got nothing to say in it. You might as well get a chair and sit down, because you don't open your mouth once through the whole thing.
But it's funny.
Very cute.
And you wrote it?
Yeah, but you keep your mouth shut. You got nothing to say whatsoever.
No, I don't have to say anything as long as you wrote it.
It's about a whale, a ship, and Jonah.
And it's funny?
Yeah.
And you wrote it?
Yeah, now don't talk no more.
Well, go ahead, let's hear it. Let's see if
Now don't
it's
say
funny.
another word.
No. As long as it's funny.
It's funny!
And it's brand new.
Now keep your mouth shut.
Go ahead, let's hear it.
Once upon a time, there was a whale.
What kind of a whale? What kind of a whale?
You see, that's what I mean. You got to keep your mouth shut. You ain't got nothing to say in this.
Well, all right, it's not important.
You don't have to ask me what kind of whale it is, because I don't know what kind of whale it was.
All right, let's forget about it.
How do I know what kind of whale it is?
Don't shout now.
What do you think I do? Belong to the whale gang or something? I know the whale. So I a whale?
All right,
I asked you to keep your mouth shut, didn't I?
Go ahead.
Well, keep it shut. Now, this whale was in the ocean.
What ocean? What ocean? I think the folks would like to know where this took place, don't you think?
Go ahead. Pick out ocean, what I care.
That's immaterial to me.
All right, the immaterial ocean.
Oh, what kind of a ship?
Now, the whale was in the immaterial ocean. He was minding his own business, but he was following a ship.
What ship?
This ship.
What ship?
What ship? I told you don't say nothing in the story. I do the whole story by myself.
You're telling it, but I just...
But you keep opening your mouth. Now keep it shut.
I only asked you what kind of a ship.
A ship, a plain everyday ship that swims in the water.
You mean a swim ship?
Yeah. Now, the whale was following a swim ship because... Who ever heard of a swim ship?
I don't know, Lou. That's your story.
Please, keep your mouth shut, will you, please?
All right, go ahead.
You're getting me aggravated now.
Take it easy, take it easy. Go ahead.
Now, the ship was following the whale.
What?
Because now I got the ship following the whale.
The whale was following the ship.
The whale was following the ship because the whale was hungry.
Naturally.
Now, Captain Jonah was the captain of the boat, and he don't want the whale to capsize the boat.
What?
He don't want the whale to capsize the boat.
Capsize.
So he don't want the whale to capsize the boat.
Capsize.
So he...
Because you know what capsize means.
I don't put in big words like that if I don't know what it means. Plus, I know what it means. He don't want the whale
What
to
does it mean?
capsize.
Capsize.
That's a big word.
Well, what does it mean?
It's a good one.
Well, what does it mean?
Capsize.
Capsize.
Story should have been over.
Well, what does it mean? Get it over with.
Capsize.
Capsize.
Right. 7 1/4. 6.
All right. Go ahead.
So he didn't want the whale to 6 7/8 the boat.
Yeah.
So what did he? Captain Jonah was a brave man, so he threw the whale over a barrel of apples.
What kind of apples?
And just as soon as he
What kind of apples?
I guess you're not to interrupt me.
Well, what kind of apples? What's so harmful about that?
Plain everyday apples.
Well,
apples that grow on a tree.
Well, there's all kinds of apples, Lou. There's Baldwin apples, there's Frost apples.
Crab apples!
Well, tell the people.
He's got me mad at you,
All right,
folks.
take it easy,
now.
take it easy, take it easy. Come on now, get it over with.
So the whale ate the apples.
Yeah, he ate the
Now,
apples.
Captain Jonah realized that the whale was still going to capsize the boat. Don't ask me again about that thing.
All right.
So when the whale ate the apples, he was still hungry, so then Captain Jonah threw him over a stool. What kind of stool?
Who said that?
Me, in case you asked. A three-legged camp stool. So the whale ate the stool. Now, the whale ate the apples, and the whale ate the stool, and the whale was still hungry. In other words, his appetite had not been appeased.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty good word,
All right,
too.
well, go ahead. Let's hear the finish of this.
So Captain Jonah, being a very brave man, he didn't want the whale to capsize the boat, and he wanted to save all the passengers on the boat. So what did he do?
I don't know.
I'm going to tell you what he did.
Just
Keep
story.
quiet.
Go ahead.
He sacrificed himself.
Yeah.
He threw a beautiful jackknife dive right off the boat into the mouth of the whale. Now, the whale opened up his mouth, and he swallowed Captain Jonah. He swallowed the apples, and he swallowed the stool, and then the whale swam away.
Wait a minute, Lou.
3 years later, they caught that very same whale down here in the bay.
Just a minute.
And they cut him open.
Wait a minute, Lou.
And what do you think they found?
Wait a minute, just 1 minute. One more interruption.
Now, he says something here, then I tell
Wait a
you
minute.
the funny answer.
One more interruption. Lou, you're not coming out here in front of this intelligent audience. Millions and millions of people listening and watching. You're not coming out and trying to get away with that old wheeze, that old pun about the time they caught the whale and they cut him open and there they found Jonah seated on that stool selling those apples 3 for a nickel, are you? That's not the story you intended to come out here and open up a show with. Now, wait a minute. Folks, I'm really sorry. I want to apologize. It couldn't be that story. Because every little schoolboy knows that story. That's right. And he said it was brand new. No one had ever heard about it. But I'm sorry. I apologize. Now, you go ahead and tell the folks what they found when they cut the whale open. I say tell the folks what they found when they cut the whale open. You do know the answer, don't you? Feel good? You know, I thought it was a build-up to that old wheeze, but it couldn't be that because every little schoolboy knows that joke. Cut the whale open there, they found Jonah seated on the stool. Lou, come here a minute now. We're not finished. I want you to tell the folks.